Bienvenidos amigos y amigas a un capítulo especial de Sin Malditas Excusas. El día de hoy tenemos a un gran invitado y para poder presentarla vamos a cambiar y comenzaremos a hablar en inglés el día de hoy. Welcome everyone. Today we have a new chapter of Sin Malditas Excusas, what in English would be something similar to No Damn Excuses. Today, Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022, and I have the honor and privilege of being able to introduce you to this amazing guest that we have today. So, first of all, remember, why are there some who succeed and others who don't? Is it really a matter of sweat and tears, scale and impact? Our guest today, Rita McGrath, is a best-selling author, a sought-after speaker, and a longtime professor at Columbia Business School. She's widely recognized as a premier expert on leading innovation and growth during times of uncertainty. Rita has received the #1 Achievement Award for Strategy from the prestigious Thinkers 50 and has been consistently named one of the world's top 10 management thinkers in its biannual ranking. As a consultant to CEOs, her work has had a lasting impact on strategy and growth programs of Fortune 500 companies worldwide. Rita is the author of the best-selling The End of Competitive Advantage, Harvard Business Review Press 2013, and her new big book is Seeing Around Corners, How to Spot Inflections Points in Business Before They Happen. She has written 3 other books, including Discovery-Driven Growth, cited by Clayton Christensen, and Creating One of the Most Important Management Ideas Ever Developed. She's a highly sought-after speaker at exclusive corporate events around the globe, such as the Global Peter Drucker Forum. She received her PhD from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and has degrees with honors from Barnard College and the Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. You can follow Rita on Twitter at RGMCGrath. Let me welcome Rita to the stage right now. Rita, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello from New York.
Excellent. Greetings from Chile, South America, Santiago, from here to the world. And
I love Santiago. It's a very
have you been
beautiful
here?
city. I have. It's a beautiful city.
Nice, very nice. So Rita, I was telling you background on backstage, sorry, that I was very happy to have you on the show today. And the truth is that I did not believe when I received your email saying, okay, I'm coming to the show, I'm going to be there. And I was, oh my God, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And to tell the community how this happened, this all started when I saw a post on you that you mentioned in LinkedIn, something similar to the best that can happen is that you ask and you got no reply. But the most important thing is that you actually try, and once you done that, or you try to achieve something, most of the times you're going to get a positive result, and that's why we are here today speaking.
Fabulous. Absolutely.
So Rita, if we start right now, in simple words, how do you describe what you do for a living to a child?
I tell stories about how people create success in business.
Perfect. Excellent. Excellent. And as a child, did you saw yourself doing what you just described, telling stories to describe businesses?
Well, as you ask, I'm thinking about it, and there were a number of different things I thought I might do. At one point, I thought I might be a journalist. which would be the same kind of thing, right? Telling stories. I also thought I might run for public office. I had a big interest in, and still do, in public policy. So that also would involve, reaching out to people and communicating. So, it's not that far from some of the things I thought I might do.
Excellent, excellent. And can you tell us a little bit about what interesting projects are you working nowadays?
So my passion project at the moment is creating tools that help organizations better manage under uncertainty. And given all the uncertainty that we've got, it's a very topical thing. And so it consists of some diagnostic tools. So we've got a way that you can diagnose how healthy your team is. And the way that works is people, you tell us who's on your team and we send you an email communication. Everybody fills in a survey and then we get together and talk about what we found. And we found it really helps teams accelerate their progress. So that's an example. I've also got a software tool that helps bring the practices of discovery-driven growth to life. And then, of course, I'm always working on the next book and articles. I publish a weekly newsletter called Thought Sparks about things I think are interesting. This week's is about autonomous cars.
Wow. Excellent, excellent. I saw recently that you launched as well a LinkedIn course,
Yes.
which is called Discovery-Driven Leadership. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a wonderful opportunity when the people at LinkedIn came to me and said they'd like to think about this. So when we think about leadership, I think we tend to settle on one or two visions of what leadership is, that leadership is about change, or leadership is about telling people what to do, and that's really different from management, and we make these distinctions. And what being discovery driven as a leader really means is I'm willing to take in information and I'm willing to alter my behavior as the information dictates. Because this image we have of, a leader is up on a horse with a sword telling everybody what to do, when times are really uncertain, there's a limit to how much you can do of that. So the other thing I think that's important to recognize about leaders is you need a different style when it's, we've got to get everybody marching in a straight line that way because there's a crisis and everyone needs to align very quickly. So, for example, in the beginning of the pandemic, we would have seen that kind of leadership and it would have been entirely appropriate, right? You needed to get the organization moving very quickly in response to a crisis. And that's a different kind of leadership than when you're trying to create variety, when you're trying to create new novel solutions to unforeseen problems, to problems nobody's seen before. And that kind of leadership is very open, very curious, really tolerating a lot of variance, tolerating a lot of the unexpected. And so there's a whole range, right, of situations in which a leader might need to express different behaviors. So I'm very taken with the philosophy of my colleague Hitendra Wadhwa, who says, what you want to do is align yourself internally. And that's the consistent part, right? That's the part where you get in touch with your own purpose and values. And then externally, you can have the kind of impact that you need to, depending on the situation that you're in.
Excellent. Very interesting. Rita, I'm quite interested on knowing how do you get to write such amazing books. For example, The End of the Competitive Advantage that we mentioned at the beginning, and Seeing Around Corners, and also Discovery-Driven Leadership. How do you get all of those ideas, and how do you come up with all that information? What do you see? What do you perceive? If you can tell what inspires you and what motivates you to write those kind of books?
Well, they usually begin with a puzzle or a quandary or something that I see in the world that doesn't fit, the preconceived ideas that we've had. And so just to take End of Advantage as an example, in strategy for years, we've talked about this wonderful thing being, the creation of sustainable competitive advantage. And we've talked about industry boundaries being relatively fixed and stability being the normal thing. And, you had this notion of what's called punctuated equilibrium, where you have equilibrium, and then maybe there's a change and then you settle into a new equilibrium. But the assumption being that steady state is the norm. And I started saying to myself, well, wait a minute, in more and more parts of the economy that I see anyway, advantages come and advantages go. And if you just think about the telephony space, just one that'll be familiar to everybody. I mean, we've all forgotten now, but there was a time when Motorola could do no wrong, right? And then Nokia could do no wrong. And then, BlackBerry could do no wrong. And now iPhone can do no wrong. But, we forget that these things have these waves, right? And you see the same in gaming, but you're even starting to see the same in what we've historically thought of as natural resources industries. So oil and gas companies are being asked to transform to become more renewable friendly. We're seeing even mining companies being asked to participate more in the circular economy than the extraction economy. And so it was really motivated by a desire to say, well, if that's the strategy that I'm seeing, it's temporary, it's transient, it's not sustainable. What are the rules that apply in that kind of a world? And that's a fascinating idea, right? And so that was where the end of competitive advantage came from. And then seeing around corners was, how do you mark the transitions, right? How do you mark the transition into a new advantage and then the transition out of it? And that connected me to Andy Grove's ideas about strategic inflection points and how they feel as though they came out of nowhere. And yet when you really study them, they've often been underway for a very, very long time before you actually feel them.
And at the beginning of the show, of the program, I questioned you. I asked you a question about at the beginning of your early years when you were a child. I don't know if you did imagine that you would be on the position that you are nowadays, with all of the success that you have achieved nowadays. Did you imagine that all of this was going to happen?
No, not at all. My parents were scientists. And so my mother was a microbiologist and my father was an organic chemist. And I guess if I thought about it at all, I would have imagined I'd be at a university, which I am, but probably, as a student or a professor, and having the sort of life my parents had, which was a very rich and wonderful one. But I never thought it would be as public as it is.
Amazing. And following the questions regarding books, which one has been the most difficult to write and why?
Well, I think probably the end of competitive advantage. And there were two reasons why. The original way I constructed the book was following along the life cycle of a competitive advantage. So you'd begin with the innovation process, and then you'd have the process of getting an advantage installed in the market, so the launch process. Then you'd have a period of being able to enjoy the fruits of what you had built. And then as competition catches up or technology changes or something shifts in your environment, you'd have that process of decline. And it seemed to me when I started the book as a very logical way to write it. But as my editor and I worked on it, I have a wonderful, wonderful editor called Melinda Marino at Harvard Business School Publishing, Harvard Business Review Press, rather, they call themselves now. And she read a bunch of the early drafts and she just said, this just isn't working. And I said, well, let's talk about that. And so what we ended up doing was, so if you imagine the book was kind of written this way, and what we ended up doing was saying, no, actually, to really capture the phenomena, it's got to be written this way. And so instead of talking about the life cycle of a competitive advantage, we're really talking about the new strategy playbook is what I call it, where what you're looking at is 6 things. But essentially what had happened was 2 years worth of work that was organized like that had to be completely flipped around to have a completely different structure. It was hard, but it was a stronger book for it. I'm very grateful to her because I think what had happened was to write about each stage, right? You've almost got to pick a company that's at that stage. And what that means is some of the examples were very out of date. Some of the companies that had been good examples of a particular stage, got themselves into trouble later, and it just wasn't working. So I ended up reorganizing the book around 6 elements of what I call the new strategy playbook, which are basically, you can't think of stability as the norm anymore. You have to think of change as the norm, and that's one element. Another element is we have to get smarter about disengaging, stopping things. How do we realize that not everything we're doing today should continue into the future? We've got to get much better at moving resources around our organizations so that the best resources get put against the best opportunities. Innovation can't anymore be sort of, I call it innovation theater, right? So we send everybody off to Silicon Valley and we have boot camps where we come up with ideas and hackathons, and whatever. And that's all great. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it has to be followed up with actual practical proficiency. And then this leadership idea, this idea of discovery driven rather than, telling people what to do kind of leaders. And the last piece, which might be very interesting for your listeners, is talent. That increasingly we're in a world where talent is operating in what Reid Hoffman and his co-author Chris Ye call a tour of duty environment. They call it the alliance right there. So I may join you for a project or a program, and I'll see that through to the end. But then when it's done, there's no guarantee I'm going to stay with your company forever. We're also seeing people coming and going from the same firm over and over again. So I may leave, I may spend 18 months with somebody else, I may come back. We're seeing a lot more of that. And that never used to happen. I mean, it used to be if you quit, if you left a company, you put your stuff in a cardboard box and we'll have security escort you to the parking lot and don't ever talk to us again. I mean, it was a completely different kind of environment.
And Rita, what intrigues me here is that we have seen books, papers, a lot of information that says all of this, but companies they I don't know if they don't want to see it. They don't. Why? I believe what must happen for companies to implement all of these things that you have mentioned. If you can tell something.
Yeah, they struggle. And so I think a couple of reasons why it's so difficult is, I think the first one is, even though we have all these tools and we have all this knowledge about innovation on the one hand and about disengagement and transformation on the other, it's not something we're taught in school. Like if you look at a typical business syllabus, a curriculum, you're not taught much about innovation, right? You're not taught much about transformation. You're taught about finance. You're taught about accounting. You're taught about some management, but it's typically management in the sense of how do you manage efficiently? How do you manage to optimize? And so we have a whole center of gravity around this steady state part of the life cycle, and we really don't teach people the others. So I think that's one reason. The other reason is I really don't think we have a lot of tools, which is why I founded my company Valise, to just give people a place to start. I mean, even when people understand the concept, they go back to their companies and it's like, how do I even know where to begin? I was, in fact, talking to a mining company the other day, and they said, well, our business is very simple. Once you've identified a site, it's all about 15 or 20 years of just operate safely, but with great precision and great efficiency to extract whatever it is you're mining for. And then they said, but actually, now that I'm saying that, things actually are changing. Our end market is changing, and the way that we have to trade is changing. And the criticism that's being made of us in terms of our environmental impact is having an effect. And so even in those very stable industries, things are changing. So we're not training people. There are no readily available tools. And then I think the last thing is discomfort. I mean, by definition, if I've been very successful in one kind of business, and, so I was in mining, and now you're telling me, well, instead of mining, we're going to go circular. We're going to take our skills and capabilities and we're going to do recycling instead of extraction. Well, if I was really successful in mining, what do I know about recycling? Like, what do I like? Are my library obsolete? Are my personal skills obsolete? And so it's very human to kind of cling on to what you know for way too long. And so I think the better companies create almost a glide path to help their people adjust to that change. And you can't do it too abruptly. I mean, I think that's something else. People, sometimes they get so excited about the fact that there's this wonderful future opportunity. They try to move too fast, and the organization just rejects it or can't keep up, or there's so much internal distress. You have incredible management turnover. People aren't able to keep up. So just as an aside, like what's happening at Twitter right now, right? You've got a new owner who's very aggressively trying to change many things about the company. And I'm just doubtful that any company can absorb that much change that quickly, right?
Exactly. For all of you that just have tuned in, we are speaking with Rita McGrath, the best-selling author, sought-after speaker, and longtime professor at Columbia Business School. Rita, do you have a formula to achieve disruptive innovation?
For your listeners?
Yeah.
Well, if I had a formula, I don't know that it's a formula, but it is a process. So I think the first thing you really need to start with is, what is the job your customer wants to get done? And I would describe that's following Tony Ulwick's work and Clayton Christensen's work. And he said, don't think of selling products and services, right? Think of your customers hiring you to get important jobs done in their lives. So what is it they're trying to accomplish as they're going about their day? And then what I would look for are places where that job is not being done very well. Places where customers are working around it, or they're dissatisfied, or something is, not good enough, or it's too expensive. So just to take an example that will probably be familiar to your listeners, if you take most regulated taxi operations, right? There's a lot that dissatisfies customers about them, right? So the taxis aren't available when you need them. You're at the mercy of local dispatch. So if you're far away from a city center, there's no way of easily getting a taxi, and. And so in many ways, Uber and the companies like Uber that have sprung up all over the world are in response to that customer dissatisfaction. I want to get from here to here, and there's just no good way to do that. And so that opens the opportunity for a disruptive player to enter. And so you always want to be thinking, if you're an incumbent, you want to be thinking about, what are the places where my customers are not satisfied, right? What are the negatives that are in my model that some disruptor could grab onto and achieve more, right? Now, it's very important as you're doing that you actually are paying attention to the customer's behavior, because customers will often lie to you. I mean, one of the most famous flops in all of history, right, was when McDonald's decided to try to make healthy hamburgers, right? And they invented this thing called the McLean burger, because they went out and interviewed potential customers. And they said, would you like a healthy, nutritious, lean, burger from McDonald's? Would that meet your needs? And we all said to them, oh, absolutely. We are not the sort of people that would go to McDonald's and eat a greasy, fatty. No. We're all about, healthy nutrition, and we run 5 miles a day, and we do all this stuff. So McDonald's believed them. They went and invented this thing called the McLean burger. And I was talking to the head of marketing for McDonald's shortly after this thing completely failed. She said, yeah, the only people that actually bought those worked for McDonald's in their marketing department. And it turns out when we go to McDonald's, we know exactly what we want to buy.
Oh, that's interesting. Very interesting. Rita, if we can address the question of young people that is just start looking what kind of career they are going to pursue, to they are going to study in the future, something that probably right now is not even created.
That's exactly right.
What kind of recommendation would you give to someone that is just starting his path to university? Or not even university, he's on school, on college, and he probably is wondering. I mean, he's seeing this and he's listening to you talking about innovation, disruption. What would you recommend to people that probably is not sure on what to study?
Sure.
What can they study?
Yeah, well, I have two recommendations. The first is to go get hold of a really marvelous book by a gentleman called Tony Fadell. That's Faddell. Now, many people don't know who he is, but he's the father of the iPod. He was at Apple when they created some of their most iconic products. And his book is called Build. And I think it's called A Guide to Making Things Worth Making is the subtitle of the book. And the book is actually written from the perspective of he wants to pass on to young people some of the mentoring and some of the lessons that he learned from people who mentored him, who unfortunately in many cases are no longer with us. And so he said he wants to capture that advice. And each chapter of the book, he starts off with, when you're in your 20s, when you're in your teens, here are some things to think about as you are constructing a life. So I think that's just a really great resource for people that are a bit lost as to how do I construct a life. The second thing is I wouldn't overstress on learning any one particular thing. I think the skill that's going to be most valuable is the ability to continuously learn. And a great mentor of mine is an entrepreneur by the name of Jay Steinfeld. And he started a little blinds company, window coverings, that they fended off Amazon. They fended off Home Depot. They fended off, this tiny little upstart oversaw everyone. And when he's recruiting for people, he always says one of the questions they ask in an interview is, what have you done as a human? What have you done to learn a new skill, to learn, even if it's not work related, right? Have you tried to learn a language? Have you tried to take on a new hobby? Have you done something that was a little bit of a stretch for you? And he says he specifically looks for people with that quality, that are always curious, they're always trying to learn. And then in terms of specifically what you do, I think the thing I always look for is, what do you find is really fascinating? Like what would you do even if you weren't being paid to do it, or even if you didn't feel it was really important? The thing I would avoid is getting into some subject because you think it's going to be lucrative in the future, or because, the guidance counselor told you so, or whatever, because that, it's all going to change anyway. And so, you need to develop a sense of what it is that gets you excited. Like, what do you really enjoy doing? And then what are you good at? If there's something you really enjoy doing, but you're not very good at it, that's more of a hobby. And I'm not saying don't do those things. There's always things to learn, but you want to try to find that sweet spot of what am I good at? And what do I enjoy? What do I really enjoy?
Great recommendations, Rita. Rita, let me take you to the topic number 2 of this show, which is called Trigger Questions. So the idea is that you reply with a short answer, not very long.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question for you is, where do you get inspiration to do everything you do?
Learning and curiosity. I'm very curious about the world around me.
Perfect. Rita, what's your purpose in life?
To make organizations and the people in them, a little bit better than they were before I met them.
Okay. Number 3, what is worrying you nowadays?
The polarization and the enmity we seem to be feeling for our fellow human beings, it's not good.
Okay. What technology attracts you the most?
Right now?
Yes.
That's a good one. I would say, what do they call it? Ambient computer interfaces, where it's either spoken or touch, or we're relating to computers somehow without keyboards.
Wow, nice. Didn't hear that one. What is your greatest fear in life, Rita?
Fear? Oh, well, I have 2 children, so I think most mothers would say their greatest fear is something terrible happens to their children.
Of course. And bonus track, can you recommend books, obviously your books, but some movies, series, or podcasts that you recommend to the people of the community?
Well, for a book, I love Safi Bakal's book, Loom Shots, about the surprising ways that discoveries that change our lives are made. I think that's a fascinating book. I really like in a completely different genre, Jeffrey Pfeffer's book, 7 Rules of Power. Because I don't think we understand very well how powerful people get that way and the impact that it can have. And as Jeffrey will tell you, he said, if more good people don't learn to use power well, the only people that are going to use power are the people who don't mean so well. So that's the second book I can definitely recommend. Podcasts, I'm very partial to podcasts like How I Built This by Guy Raz. I like we have a daily show here called Marketplace, which I'm very fond of. It's sort of economic news, and it's just half an hour every day, and I try to listen to that quite often. So those are some that I follow.
Do you watch movies or series?
I do sometimes, not a whole lot, but for fun, I'll watch. So I watched bits of The Crown. I quite enjoyed The Gilded Age, which was a very popular. It just finished its first series here. That's all about 1880s New York, and I love New York, and it's all about New York in those eras. So that was a lot of fun. And then I've been watching the program about Julia Child called Julia, because I enjoy cooking, so that's fun for me.
Excellent, excellent. And Rita, if you could share a message to humankind, what kind of message would you say to everyone? And here we will put you on first screen so you can communicate your words to everyone.
I would say we need to seek a new golden age by becoming more green, becoming more circular, by giving everyone hope of a better life.
Excellent, excellent, great message. I don't know, Rita, if you can share your social networks and ways to contact you. If people,
So I'm on Twitter at RG McGrath. So RGMCGRATH, and I'm pretty active there. You'll also find me on LinkedIn. And if you like, I publish a weekly, it's not really a newsletter. It's called Thought Sparks. It's just weekly observations on things I think are interesting. And you talk about curiosity and being stimulated to write. That shows up every week on LinkedIn. You can also find it on Substack and on Medium, and on my own website, which is ritamcgrath.com.
ritamcgrath.com. Excellent. Rita, it has been a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time and all of the contributions that you have made for businesses, innovation, and in general to all the humankind and people that loved all your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to your readers or listeners.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.